The mortar was the color of old bone. Lorelei Thorne was 8 years old, the first time her father put her hand against the wall of the toll house and told her to feel the joint between two stones. It was a Sunday morning in October of 2011, and the light was coming through the hardwood canopy and copper shafts that turned the fallen leaves on the old turnpike road into something that looked like scattered coins. The toll house stood at the junction of two overgrown lanes in the middle of what had been farmland in 1840 and was mature forest now about 4 miles north of Cornwall Bridge in the Litchfield Hills of northwest Connecticut, where the roads wound through narrow valleys and the stone walls ran through the woods like the ribs of some enormous sleeping animal. The building was small, 12 feet by 12 feet fieldstone walls, 2 feet thick, a steep slate roof with holes in it, a heavy oak door that had been nailed shut from the outside, and a single narrow window on the road-facing side. The toll window. The window through which the toll keeper had collected fares from passing wagons and stagecoaches back when this road had been a chartered turnpike, and people had paid to use it back, before the automobile had made the steep, narrow routes through the Litchfield Hills unnecessary, and the turnpike companies had gone bankrupt one by one, and the toll houses had been abandoned to the weather and the trees. Silas Thorne had put his daughter's small hand on the wall beside his own larger hand, and he had said, "Feel that." Lorelei had pressed her palm against the stone. It was cold. October cold. The kind of cold that comes up from inside rock that has been standing in shadow for 200 years. "What do you feel?" her father asked. "It's cold," Lorelei said. "What else?" She moved her hand along the wall. The stones were not smooth. They had texture faces, angles. Some of the stones were flat. Some were rounded. Her fingertips found the line between two stones and she traced it. The line was filled with something hard and smooth. "The stuff between the rocks," she said. "Mortar," her father said. "Feel the mortar." She ran her finger along the joint. The mortar was smooth and hard, and it was the color of old bone. That was the phrase that came into her head, even though she was 8 years old, and had never thought about what color old bone might be. But looking at the mortar between the stones of the toll house wall, she knew. Old bone. Pale gray-white with a hint of yellow, like something that had been buried and then dug up and left in the sun. "That mortar is 209 years old," Silas said. "It was mixed by a man who knew what he was doing. Lime mortar. He burned the limestone himself, probably, and he mixed it with sand and water, and he laid these stones one at a time, and he mortared every joint. The mortar is harder than the stone now. You could hit this wall with a sledgehammer and the mortar wouldn't crack. The stone might crack, but the mortar won't." Lorelei looked up at her father. Silas Thorne was a tall man, thin, with large hands that were always clean even though he worked with wood and stone. He had a workshop behind their rented cottage, a converted chicken coop, where he built furniture. Windsor chairs and shaker tables from locally milled cherry and ash. He measured things carefully. He spoke in short, declarative sentences. He never raised his voice. And he knew things about the world that other people did not know, things about how structures were built and why they stood or fell. Things about the grain of wood and the setting of stone, and the patience required to make something that would last longer than the person who made it. "Why doesn't it crack?" Lorelei asked. Because the man who mixed it knew the ratio, Silas said. 3 parts sand to 1 part lime. Maybe 2 parts sand if the lime was very pure, and he knew to let it cure slowly, not too fast. Mortar that cures too fast is weak. Mortar that cures slowly is strong. This mortar cured for 200 years. It's still curing. It'll be stronger in another 100 years than it is today. He moved his hand along the wall, and Lorelei moved her hand beside his, following. Her father's hand was large enough to span 3 stones. Her hand could barely cover one. But they moved together, feeling the joints, the texture, the places where the mortar was smooth and the places where it was slightly rough, from the trowel marks left by the man who had laid it in 1802. This is coursed fieldstone, Silas said. See how the stones are sorted by size, largest at the bottom, smallest at the top. See how the face is flat. You could run your hand along this wall and never catch a knuckle. That's how you know a professional mason built it. A farmer building his own wall doesn't sort the stones. A farmer just stacks what he finds in his field. But a professional mason, a man being paid by a turnpike company to build a toll house, that man sorts the stones first. He sets the largest stones at the foundation. He saves the smallest stones for the top courses. He makes sure every stone has at least one flat face pointing out. And he mortars every joint, because mortar is what holds the wall when the ground settles and the frost heaves and the tree roots push from below. Lorelei pressed her hand harder against the wall. She could feel the cold of the stone moving into her palm. She could feel the hardness of the mortar. She tried to imagine a man standing where she was standing 209 years ago, mixing lime and sand and water in a wooden trough, laying stones one at a time, troweling mortar into the joints, building this wall stone by stone in the forest that had been farmland then and was forest now. Why did he build it? She asked. To collect money, Silas said. This was a toll house. You see that window? He pointed to the narrow window on the road-facing wall. That was the toll window. The toll keeper sat inside this building, and when a wagon came down the road, he would open the window and the wagon driver would stop and hand over his fare. A penny maybe, or 2 pennies, depending on the size of the wagon and how many horses were pulling it. The toll keeper would drop the coins into a box and the wagon would continue on. All day long, every day, for as long as the turnpike was in operation. Where did the money go? To the turnpike company. The company owned the road. They built it, and they maintained it, and they charged people to use it. The toll keeper worked for the company. He lived here in this building. 1 room, stone floor, stone walls, a fireplace for heat, a shelf for the toll box. That was his home. Lorelei looked at the toll house with new eyes. She had thought it was just an old building in the woods. She had not understood that someone had lived here, that a man had woken up every morning in this 12 by 12 stone room and had opened the toll window and had sat there all day collecting pennies from strangers and had gone to sleep at night with the smell of wood smoke in the air and the sound of the forest pressing in from all sides. Did he have a family? She asked. I don't know, Silas said. Maybe. Some toll keepers had wives, some had children, some lived alone. The records don't say much about the people. They say a lot about the money. How much was collected? How much was paid to the company? How much the toll keeper was allowed to keep? But they don't say much about the people. He put his hand on the top of Lorelei's head gently, the way he always did when he wanted her to pay attention to something important. "This is what I want you to learn," he said. "The reading. Not the reading of books, though that's important too. The reading of stone. The reading of mortar and joints and settlement and weathering. The reading that tells you who built something and when and why and whether they knew what they were doing. Most people walk past a stone wall and they see rocks. That's all. Rocks stacked on top of rocks. But if you learn to read stone, you see the person who built the wall. You see his skill, or his lack of skill. You see his patience, or his hurry. You see whether he cared about the work, or whether he was just trying to get it done. The stone remembers. The mortar remembers. And if you learn to read it, the wall will tell you everything." Lorelei looked at the wall. She tried to see what her father was describing. She tried to see the man who had mixed the mortar and laid the stones. She could not see him yet, but she believed her father when he said the wall remembered. "Will you teach me?" she asked. "I'm teaching you right now," Silas said. They walked around the toll house together that morning. Silas pointed out the northwest corner where the foundation had settled, and the wall had shifted slightly. A crack, running from the corner up toward the roof line. He showed her the chimney where the top 3 courses of stone had fallen away, leaving the flue open to the weather. He showed her the places where the mortar had weathered and pulled back from the stones, creating small gaps, and the places where the mortar was still tight and intact after 200 years. He showed her how to tell the difference between original construction and later repair work by looking at the color of the mortar and the way the stones were set. Original work was careful. Repair work was usually hasty. "A wall like this," Silas said, standing back and looking at the toll house as a whole, "will stand for 300 years if nobody pushes it over. The stone doesn't fail. The mortar doesn't fail. The only thing that fails is the people who stop paying attention to it." Lorelei was 8 years old. She did not fully understand what her father was telling her. She understood the words. She understood that he was teaching her to look at stone the way he looked at wood in his workshop, with attention, with patience, with the eye of someone who knew how things were made and how they came apart. But she did not yet understand why it mattered. She did not understand that 3 years from now, her father would be dead, and that this skill he was teaching her, this reading of stone, would be the most valuable thing he would leave behind. 3 years later, in the spring of 2014, Silas Thorne died of pancreatic cancer in the bedroom of the rented cottage outside Cornwall Bridge, with his wife Miriam on one side of the bed and his daughter Lorelei on the other, and the smell of cherry sawdust still in the curtains from the workshop across the yard. He had been sick for 8 months. Diagnosis to death in 8 months, which was longer than some and shorter than others, but felt to Lorelei like both an eternity and an instant. The last month he could not get out of bed. The last week he could barely speak. But 2 days before he died, he had reached out and taken Lorelei's hand, and he had squeezed it once hard, and he had said in a voice that was barely a whisper, "You see structure?" Lorelei had not known what he meant. She had said, "What, Dad?" But Silas had closed his eyes and he had not said anything else, and 2 days later, he was gone. After the funeral, after the small gathering of woodworkers and furniture makers, and people from the village who had known Silas after the coffin had been lowered into the ground in the Cornwall cemetery, under a sugar maple that was just beginning to leaf out, in the late April warmth, Lorelei had gone back to the toll house alone. She was 11 years old. She had ridden her bicycle the 4 miles north from Cornwall Bridge on the paved county road, and then she had walked the last quarter mile down the overgrown turnpike lane to the junction where the toll house stood. The building looked exactly the same as it had 3 years before. The northwest corner was still shifted. The chimney was still missing its top courses. The door was still nailed shut. The forest had grown a little thicker around it, a few more saplings crowding in, but the toll house itself was unchanged. Lorelei had walked up to the west wall, the same wall her father had put her hand against when she was 8. And she had placed her palm on the stone, and she had stood there for a long time, feeling the cold of the rock and the hardness of the mortar and the presence of the building that had been standing since 1802 and would continue standing after she was gone. She had said out loud to the empty forest and the silent toll house, "I can feel it, Dad." And then she had cried for the first time since the funeral. Her forehead pressed against the 212-year-old fieldstone wall, her tears running down the mortar joints that Silas had taught her to read. She went back every year after that. On the anniversary of his death in April, she would ride her bicycle or walk the 4 miles to the toll house, and she would stand in front of it, and she would put her hand on the wall, and she would remember. By the time she was 18, she had filled 11 notebooks with hand-drawn sketches and measurements of every stone wall and foundation and milestone she could find on every abandoned road within 10 miles of Cornwall Bridge. She had documented the settling and the weathering and the slow decay of structures that no one else was paying attention to. She had learned to read stone the way her father had read wood, with patience, with attention, with the understanding that the material remembered everything. The notebooks had become, without Lorelei planning it, a record of change. She revisited the same walls year after year, and she noted what had shifted, which stones had fallen, which mortar joints had opened, which foundations had begun to lean. In 50 years, most of it would be gone, buried under leaf mold and forest growth, and her notebooks would be the only evidence that any of it had existed. She had not gone to college. She had gotten a job after high school as a groundskeeper at a private school in Salisbury, 30 minutes north of Cornwall Bridge, mowing fields and raking leaves and plowing snow. The job paid $16 an hour and included a shared apartment in the school staff housing, a converted carriage house where Lorelei had lived with a roommate, another groundskeeper named Amanda, for 2 years. The arrangement had ended in March of 2024, 3 weeks before Lorelei's 21st birthday. Amanda had moved her boyfriend into the apartment without discussing it with Lorelei first. The boyfriend was a pleasant enough man, but he did not contribute to rent, and he had taken over the living room couch as a permanent station. And the apartment's already tight 2-person economy had been pushed into a 3-person economy that Lorelei's half of the $900 rent could no longer sustain. Amanda had not offered to renegotiate. Lorelei had not asked her to. Lorelei had simply understood in the way that a person who has been reading stone walls since the age of 8 understands certain structural truths, that a wall built for 2 people cannot hold 3 without shifting at the corner, and that a wall that is shifted at the corner is going to come down eventually. She had packed her duffel bag and her canvas rucksack and her 11 stone wall notebooks, and her father's small hand plane, the one tool she had kept from his workshop on a Saturday morning in late March. She had walked out of the staff housing and down the school's gravel driveway, and she had caught a bus from Salisbury to Litchfield. She had $1,080 in her savings account. She had no car. She had the notebooks and the hand plane and a framed photograph of her father at his workbench, taken by her mother, the Christmas before Silas had gotten sick, in which Silas was holding a freshly finished cherry Windsor chair up to the light of the workshop window to check its symmetry. His face in profile, his expression the specific patient concentration of a man who has spent 20 years making chairs and who knows without needing to measure whether a leg is true. She had gone to the Litchfield Public Library on the Monday after she left Salisbury. She had used one of the public computers to search the Litchfield County government website. She had clicked through pages of tax-delinquent properties and foreclosure listings and surplus land parcels until she had found, buried in a subsection labeled Historical Structures Pending Disposition, a single entry, Fieldstone Toll House Structure, approximately 144 square feet on 0.6-acre parcel of former turnpike right-of-way 4 miles north of Cornwall Bridge, built 1802 by Goshen Cornwall Turnpike Company, decommissioned 1912 county ownership since 1994. Historical Society interest lapsed 2013, asking price $1. Lorelei had stared at the screen. She knew this building. She had been inside it. Or rather, she had been outside it and had put her hand on its wall on a Sunday walk with her father when she was 8 years old. It was the toll house. The toll house where Silas had taught her to feel the mortar joint. The toll house where she had cried on the day of his funeral. The toll house she had visited every year for 10 years. The county was selling it for $1. She had printed the listing. She had walked from the library to the Litchfield County Clerk's office on the town green. The clerk, a man in his 60s named Mr. Aldrich, had looked at the printout and had nodded slowly. "The old toll house," he said. "Nobody's wanted that thing for years. Historical Society gave up on it back in 2013. Roof's got holes. Foundation's settled. You know it's got no utilities, right? No water, no power, no septic. It's just a stone box in the woods." "I know," Lorelei said. "You want to buy it?" "Yes." Mr. Aldrich had pulled out a form. He had filled in the blanks with a pen that had nearly run out of ink. Lorelei had signed where he indicated. She had handed him $1 bill from her wallet. He had written her a receipt, and he had gone into a back room and had come back with a heavy iron key on a piece of hemp twine. "That's the original key," he said. "Been in the county vault since 1994. Building's probably locked up tighter than a drum. You'll need a pry bar to get the door open. It's been nailed shut since the 40s, near as we can tell." He had handed her the key and the receipt. "Congratulations," he said. "You just bought the cheapest piece of real estate in Litchfield County." Lorelei had walked the 4 miles from Litchfield to the toll house that afternoon. She had walked the paved county road, and then she had turned off onto the overgrown turnpike lane, and she had followed it north through the forest for a 1/4 mile until she reached the junction where the toll house stood. The building was exactly as she remembered it, 12 feet by 12 feet, coursed fieldstone walls 2 feet thick, steep slate roof with 2 holes, heavy oak plank door nailed shut from the outside. Single, narrow toll window on the road-facing side. The northwest corner had shifted further since she had last seen it. A young sugar maple had grown up against the south wall. The forest had pressed in closer. But the walls were standing, 222 years old, and still standing. Lorelei had stopped at the Litchfield hardware store on her walk, and she had bought a pry bar and a hammer. She stood in front of the nailed door, and she worked the claw end of the hammer under the first nail head, and she pulled. The nail came free with a shriek of old iron against old wood. She pulled the second nail, the third, the fourth. There were 8 nails driven through the door into the frame, each one bent and rusted and reluctant to come free. It took her 20 minutes to remove all of them. When the last nail was out, she put her hand on the door handle. The handle was a simple iron loop, blackened with age. She pulled. The door did not move. She pulled harder. The door groaned. The hinges, which had not moved in 80 years, protested. But the door swung inward slowly, heavily, and Lorelei stepped across the threshold into the toll house for the first time in her life. One room, stone walls, stone floor, stone fireplace on the west wall. Single window with the shutters open. Wooden shelf above the fireplace. Wooden peg rack beside the door. Nothing else. The room smelled of dust and old smoke and stone that had been closed up for decades. Light came through the window and through the 2 holes in the roof. Twin shafts of pale March sunlight that illuminated the dust motes floating in the still air. Lorelei walked the interior slowly. She ran her hands along the stone walls, the way her father had taught her. North wall, east wall, south wall, west wall. She felt the mortar joints one at a time. The mortar was hard exactly as she remembered. She worked her way around the room methodically, touching every reachable stone, feeling for cracks, for settlement, for places where the wall had moved. On the west wall beside the fireplace, about 3 feet above the floor, her fingertip caught on a joint that was different from the others. She stopped. The mortar in this joint was softer, not crumbling, not failing, just softer. The consistency of chalk rather than bone. And the stone above the joint was slightly smaller than the stones around it, as though it had been fitted into a space that had originally held a larger stone. Lorelei pressed her fingertip into the soft mortar. It gave slightly. She pressed harder. A small amount of mortar dust came away on her finger. She stood very still. Her father's voice in her head. If you learn to read stone, the wall will tell you everything. This wall was telling her something. She went back to her rucksack by the door, and she found the cold chisel her father had kept in his workshop. The same chisel she had carried in her pack for years. The same chisel she had used to pry lichen off milestone foundations and to tap loose mortar from joints when she was documenting walls for her notebooks. She came back to the west wall, and she worked the chisel tip into the soft mortar joint along the top edge of the small stone. The mortar came away in thin, dry strips. She worked the chisel around all 4 edges of the stone, top, bottom, left side, right side. The mortar crumbled easily. Far more easily than the mortar in the rest of the wall. This mortar had not been mixed in 1802. This mortar was newer, maybe 100 years old, maybe less. Someone had removed a stone from this wall and had replaced it with a smaller stone, and had mortared the smaller stone into place with mortar that was softer than the original. When she had cleared the mortar from all four edges, she gripped the stone with both hands, and she pulled. The stone came free. Behind the stone, in a niche cut into the wall between the inner and outer courses of fieldstone about 12 inches wide and 10 inches tall and 6 inches deep, were two objects. The first was an iron toll collection box. It was about the size of a bread loaf. It had a narrow coin slot in the top, a hinged lid, and a small padlock hasp. The box was heavy, maybe 15 pounds, and the iron was dark with age, but not rusted through because the stone niche had kept it dry for over a century. This was the toll keeper's working tool. The box he had set on the shelf of the toll window, and into which every passing wagon driver had dropped their fare penny by penny across the decades the turnpike had been in operation. The second object was a rolled piece of heavy linen tied with a leather cord. Lorelei set the toll box on the floor. She untied the leather cord with careful fingers, and she unrolled the linen on the stone floor in the shaft of light coming through the window. It was a hand-drawn survey map. The map showed the full route of the Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike inked on linen in a careful draftsman's hand. Every curve, every grade, every bridge, every milestone. The milestones were drawn as small numbered circles along the route, 11 of them, each one labeled with its distance from Goshen. The map was dated 1803, 1 year after the toll house had been built. Lorelei knelt on the stone floor and she studied the map. The ink had faded to brown, but the lines were still clear. The cartography was precise. Whoever had drawn this map had walked every inch of the 11-mile turnpike route and had recorded it with the attention of someone who understood that a map was not just a picture, but a working document, a guide, a record of something that mattered. She looked at the toll box. There was something inside it. She could hear it shift when she moved the box. She found the hasp and she tried to open it, but the hasp was locked. There was no key. She considered forcing it, but decided against it. Instead, she used the cold chisel to carefully pry the hasp staple from the wood of the lid. The wood was old and dry, and the staple came free without damaging the box. She lifted the lid. Inside the box, beneath the coin slot mechanism, was a single folded letter. The paper was heavy stock, yellowed with age, folded into thirds. Lorelei lifted it out carefully. She unfolded it in the light from the window, and she read. The handwriting was strong and clear, written in black ink that had faded to sepia. To whoever opens this wall, my name is Ezra Caldwell. I have been the toll keeper at this gate from the spring of 1871 until today, the 14th of October, 1912. I am 63 years old. Tomorrow, the Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike will be formally decommissioned by the state of Connecticut, and this toll house will cease to be a toll station and will become, I suppose, a small stone building in the woods that nobody has any further use for. I am sealing the toll box and the survey map in the wall because I cannot surrender them to the Turnpike Company's agents, who will melt the box for scrap and file the map in a drawer in Hartford, where it will never be looked at again. The box has been in this toll window for 80 years. The map has been on this wall for 109. They belong to this building, not to any company. The box is empty. I have turned in the last day's fares to the company treasurer this afternoon. There is no money in the wall. What is in the wall is the box itself and the map itself. The box is the trade. A toll-keeper without his box is a man standing beside a road with no authority to stop anyone. The map shows every milestone on the turnpike. There are 11 milestones. Most of them are still standing as of today. I have walked the turnpike from end to end once every spring for 41 years, checking the milestones and reporting their condition to the company. I expect that after tomorrow, no one will check them again. I do not know who will find this niche. I hope it is a person who understands stone. A person who understands stone will have noticed that the mortar around one particular fieldstone on the west wall is softer than the mortar around the others. That person will know what soft mortar means in a wall of hard mortar. It means someone was here after the wall was built and left something behind. Keep the box. Find the milestones. Walk the road I walked. Ezra Caldwell, Tollkeeper. October 14th, 1912. Lorelei read the letter twice. Then she sat back on the stone floor, and she looked at the toll box, and the survey map and the letter, and the niche in the wall, and the shaft of light coming through the window. And she felt something that she had not felt since her father died. She felt like someone was speaking to her across time. Ezra Caldwell had sealed this box and this map and this letter in the wall. On the last day, the toll house had been operational 112 years ago. And he had done it because he believed that someone someday would find it. Someone who understood stone. Someone who would notice the soft mortar. Someone who would care. Lorelei leaned forward and she pressed her forehead against the cold fieldstone of the west wall. And she closed her eyes. She stayed that way for a long time. Her forehead against 222-year-old stone. The toll box beside her. The survey map spread on the floor. The letter in her hand. Then she opened her eyes and she said to the empty toll house and to the iron box and to the survey map and to Ezra Caldwell, who had been dead for more than a century, "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I will find them." She spent the rest of that day cleaning the toll house. She swept the floor with a broom she had brought in her pack. She cleared the debris from the fireplace. She tested the chimney draw by lighting a small fire of dry twigs and watching the smoke rise cleanly up and out through the missing top courses. The chimney worked. The fireplace worked. The building was sound. She spent the night in the toll house. She had a sleeping bag and a camp stove and enough food for 2 days. She made tea on the stove and she sat by the fire. And she studied the survey map by firelight. The map showed the 11-mile route from Goshen to Cornwall Bridge. The milestones were marked at regular intervals roughly 1 mile apart. Milestone 1 was just south of Goshen. Milestone 11 was at Cornwall Bridge. The toll house was at the junction approximately halfway along the route between Milestone 5 and Milestone 6. She traced the route with her finger. She had walked parts of this turnpike over the years, sections of it anyway, but she had never walked the entire route. She had never looked for the milestones. She had not known they were important. Now she knew. Ezra Caldwell had walked this road once every spring for 41 years, from 1871 to 1912. He had checked the milestones. He had reported their condition. And on the last day of the turnpike's operation, he had sealed the survey map in the wall, and he had written a letter asking someone to find the milestones and walk the road he had walked. Lorelei folded the letter and placed it carefully back in the toolbox. She rolled the survey map and tied it with the leather cord. She set the toolbox on the wooden shelf above the fireplace, exactly where the original tollkeeper would have kept it. She hung the survey map on the wall beside the door. She lay down in her sleeping bag on the stone floor, and she looked up at the ceiling where the firelight flickered across the oak beams and the underside of the slate roof. Through the holes in the roof, she could see stars. She thought about her father. She thought about Ezra Caldwell. She thought about the 11 milestones somewhere out there in the forest, most of them probably fallen or buried or forgotten. She thought about the letter her father had never written, but that she could imagine him writing. You see, structure, he had said 2 days before he died. She had not understood what he meant. She understood now. She saw structure. She saw how things were built, and how they stood, and how they failed, and how they could be saved. She saw the pattern, the trade, the reading that her father had taught her when she was 8 years old, and that she had been practicing ever since, without fully understanding what it was for. It was for this. She fell asleep in the toll house with the fire burning low, and the stars visible through the holes in the roof and the iron toll box on the shelf above her head. And when she woke in the morning, the fire had gone out and the light was coming through the toll window, and she knew what she was gonna do. She was gonna find the 11 milestones. She was going to walk the road Ezra Caldwell had walked. She was going to finish what her father had started, without knowing he was starting it. She packed her sleeping bag and her camp stove, and she locked the toll house door with the iron key Mr. Aldrich had given her. She walked back to Litchfield, and she went to the town clerk's office, and she asked Mr. Aldrich if there were any restrictions on the property she had purchased. Mr. Aldrich had looked at her with mild curiosity. Restrictions? It's yours. You bought it. You can do what you want with it as long as you don't violate zoning. Why? I want to live there, Lorelei said. Mr. Aldrich had raised his eyebrows. Live there in the toll house. There's no utilities, no septic, no well. I know. You planning to fix it up? I'm planning to restore it, Lorelei said. And I'm planning to find the 11 milestones on the old turnpike route. Mr. Aldrich had stared at her for a moment. Then he had said, "The milestones. I'll be damned. I didn't know any of those were still around." "They are," Lorelei said. "According to the 1912 records, most of them were still standing when the turnpike was decommissioned. That was 112 years ago." "Stone lasts," Lorelei said. Mr. Aldrich had smiled a slow smile that made him look younger. "Your father was Silas Thorne, wasn't he? The furniture maker?" "Yes. I bought a table from him once. Beautiful work. Shaker-style cherry mortise and tenon joints so tight you couldn't slip a playing card into them." He paused. "He taught you, didn't he? How to see the structure?" "Yes," Lorelei said. "Well then," Mr. Aldrich said, "I expect you'll find those milestones. And when you do, you let me know. The Historical Society might be interested." Lorelei had thanked him, and she had walked back to the toll house, and she had started clearing the overgrown turnpike lane. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now, on a cold morning in early April, Lorelei stood in front of the toll house with a bow saw in her hand. and looked at the young birch saplings that had colonized the old roadbed. She had been cutting saplings and dragging brush for 3 weeks, and she had cleared about 200 yards of the lane. At this rate, it would take her another month to clear the full quarter-mile from the county road to the toll house. But she was in no hurry. She had time. She had $1,080 in savings, which was enough to buy food and propane for maybe 3 months, if she was careful. She had the toll house. She had the survey map. She had Ezra Caldwell's letter. And she had a purpose. She set the bow saw against a birch trunk and she began to cut. The sound of the saw cutting through green wood was rhythmic and satisfying. Back and forth, back and forth. The teeth biting into the sapwood, the sawdust falling in pale curls, the sapling trembling and then giving way and falling across the old road with a crash of branches and new leaves. She dragged the sapling to the edge of the lane and added it to the brush pile. She moved to the next tree. She cut and dragged, working her way down the lane toward the county road. By midday, she had cleared another 20 yards. She stopped for lunch. She had bread and cheese and an apple. She sat on a fallen log, and she ate slowly. And she looked back at the toll house through the gap she had cut in the forest. The building looked solid from here, the stone walls catching the April light, the slate roof dark against the green canopy, a thin line of smoke rising from the chimney, because she had left a fire burning to keep the interior dry. It looked like a home. It was a home. Her home. Bought for $1 and earned with 3 weeks of labor and the promise of more labor to come. She had never owned anything before. The apartment in Salisbury had been rented. The cottage where she had grown up with her parents had been rented. Everything in her life had been temporary borrowed contingent on someone else's permission. This was hers. She finished her lunch and she was about to pick up the saw again when she heard the sound of a vehicle coming down the county road. She stood and she watched through the trees as a dark blue truck turned off the pavement onto the overgrown turnpike lane and drove slowly toward her, branches scraping the sides. The truck stopped about 50 yards away where the lane became too narrow to continue. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was maybe 45 years old, medium height, wearing work boots and canvas pants and a flannel shirt. He had the look of someone who spent time outdoors. Weathered face, calloused hands. He walked toward Lorelei with a confident stride that suggested he owned the ground he was walking on. "You must be the one who bought the toll house," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Lorelei said. "Graham Pendleton." He held out his hand. Lorelei shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. Lorelei Thorne. "I heard someone had finally taken that property off the county's hands," Graham said. "I didn't think anyone would actually want to live out here." "Why not? No utilities, no road access, no neighbors. Most people want more than a stone box in the woods." "I'm not most people," Lorelei said. Graham smiled. It was a careful smile, the smile of someone who was used to negotiating. "No, I suppose you're not. My company has been looking at this parcel for a couple of years now. We were going to make an offer to the county, but they said someone had already bought it. That would be you." "Your company?" "Brendev Properties. We do heritage development. Historical sites, ecotourism, that kind of thing." I was hoping to acquire this property in the old turnpike corridor and build a small heritage resort. Cabins, hiking trails, maybe a visitor center focused on the history of the turnpikes in Litchfield County. Lorelei looked at Graham Pendleton, and she understood immediately what he was saying and what he was not saying. He wanted the land. He wanted the toll house. And he was here to convince her to sell. "The toll house isn't for sale," she said. "I understand," Graham said, "and I respect that. But I wanted to talk to you anyway because there's something you should know about the deed you signed." Lorelei felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What about it?" "The county sold you the property under a provisional clause. It's in the fine print. The deed transfers ownership, but it's contingent on a 90-day review period. If the county determines that the property has historical significance that warrants preservation, they can petition to have the transfer reversed and the property placed under county stewardship. And if they determine that the property has no historical significance, then the deed stands, but the county retains the right to approve or deny any development plans." "I don't plan to develop it," Lorelei said. "I plan to restore it." "That's development," Graham said. "Any structural work is development. You'd need a permit, and the county can deny the permit if they decide the property is better suited for other uses." "What other uses?" "Economic development," Graham said, "which is where my company comes in. We're prepared to make you an offer. A fair offer. More than fair, actually, considering the property's current condition. We'll pay you $50,000 for the toll house and the surrounding parcel. That's $50,000 for a building you bought for $1 3 weeks ago." Lorelei looked at him. She did not speak. Graham continued, "I know it sounds like I'm trying to push you out. I'm not. I'm trying to offer you a good deal. You keep the $50,000. We take on the liability of the restoration and the development. Everybody wins." "Except the toll house," Lorelei said. Graham frowned. "What do you mean? You said you want to build a heritage resort. Cabins and trails and a visitor center. That means tearing down the toll house or moving it somewhere else. It means turning this into something it's not." "We wouldn't tear it down," Graham said. "We'd relocate it, move it stone by stone to a more accessible location, restore it properly, make it part of the visitor experience. People could actually see it instead of having it hidden in the woods where nobody knows it exists." "It's not hidden," Lorelei said. "It's where it's supposed to be, at the junction of the old turnpike. If you move it, it's not the toll house anymore. It's just a pile of rocks that looks like the toll house." Graham's expression shifted slightly. The negotiating smile faded. "You're serious about this?" "Yes. You realize you're going to have a hard time making this work. No utilities, no income, and the county can revoke your deed if you can't prove the property has historical value within 90 days. "I can prove it," Lorelei said. "How?" "The same way Ezra Caldwell proved it," Lorelei said. "I'm going to walk the turnpike and find the milestones." Graham stared at her. "The milestones? There are 11 of them. Or there were in 1912. I'm going to find them and document them and show the county that this toll house and this turnpike corridor have continuous historical significance that goes back 222 years. Graham was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My great-grandfather worked on this turnpike." Lorelei looked at him with new attention. "What?" "Nathaniel Pendleton. He was a laborer for the Turnpike Company in the 1880s. He helped maintain the road, repair the bridges, reset the milestones when they shifted. I have letters he wrote to his wife. He mentions the toll house. He mentions the toll keeper, a man named Ezra Caldwell. Lorelei felt something click into place. Ezra Caldwell was the toll keeper from 1871 to 1912. I know, Graham said. Nathaniel wrote about him. They were friends, apparently, or at least friendly. Nathaniel respected Caldwell. He said Caldwell walked the turnpike every spring to check the milestones, and that he cared more about that road than the company ever did. Why didn't you mention this before? Lorelei asked. Because it doesn't change anything, Graham said. My great-grandfather's connection to this place is part of the reason I want to develop it. I want to honor that history. But honoring history doesn't mean leaving a building to rot in the woods. It means preserving it in a way that people can actually experience it. Ezra Caldwell didn't want the toll house preserved in a museum, Lorelei said. He wanted it to stay where it is. That's why he sealed the toll box and the map in the wall instead of turning them over to the company. He knew they'd file them away and forget about them. He wanted someone to find them here in this building at this location. Graham looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, You found something in the wall. It was not a question. It was a statement. Lorelei nodded. What did you find? The toll box, the survey map, and a letter from Ezra Caldwell asking whoever found it to walk the turnpike and check the milestones. Graham exhaled slowly. So, that's why you're clearing the lane? Yes. And you think if you find the milestones, the county will grant you permanent ownership and deny my development application? I think if I find the milestones and prove that this corridor has historical value, then yes, the county might decide that preservation is more important than development. Graham was quiet. He looked past Lorelei at the toll house visible through the trees. He looked at the cleared section of lane. He looked at the bow saw and the brush piles and the evidence of 3 weeks of hard labor. Then he said, You have 90 days. I know. I'll give you 60, Graham said. I'm filing a formal development proposal with the county next week. If they approve it, your deed becomes void, and the property reverts to county control. And if the county controls it, they can sell it to me under eminent domain for economic development purposes. Lorelei felt her chest tighten. You can't do that. I can, Graham said. The provisional clause in your deed allows for it. You bought the property for $1. The county can buy it back for $1 if they decide it serves the public interest. And a heritage resort that brings tourism and tax revenue serves the public interest more than a 21-year-old woman living alone in a stone house in the woods. He said it matter-of-factly without malice, but the words hit Lorelei like a physical blow. 60 days, Graham said again. If you can prove historical significance before my proposal gets approved, you might have a chance, but I wouldn't count on it. The county wants development. They've wanted it for years. That's why they let the Historical Society abandon this place back in 2013. He turned and walked back to his truck. He paused with his hand on the door handle and he looked back at Lorelei. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you find the milestones. Nathaniel would have wanted that, but business is business, and 60 days isn't much time. He got in the truck and he drove away back down the narrow lane toward the county road, the branches scraping the sides as he went. Lorelei stood in the middle of the cleared lane, and she watched the truck disappear. She felt something in her chest that was part anger and part fear and part determination. 60 days. She had 60 days to find the milestones, document them, and convince the county that this place mattered more than Graham Pendleton's Heritage Resort. 60 days to prove that Ezra Caldwell's letter had not been written in vain. 60 days to finish what her father had started when he put her hand on the toll house wall and taught her to feel the mortar joint. She picked up the bow saw and she went back to cutting saplings. The sound of the saw was louder now, more urgent, the rhythm faster. Cut and drag, cut and drag. Clearing the lane, opening the road, making it possible to walk the turnpike the way Ezra Caldwell had walked it, the way Nathaniel Pendleton had walked it, the way her father would have walked it if he had lived long enough. She worked until dark, and when she finally stopped and walked back to the toll house and lit the fire and sat on the stone floor with Ezra Caldwell's letter in her hands, she read it again by firelight. I do not know who will find this niche. I hope it is a person who understands stone. She understood stone. Keep the box. Find the milestones. Walk the road I walked. She would find them. She would walk the road. She had 60 days and $1,080 in a toll house bought for $1 and a letter from a man who had been dead for 112 years. It would have to be enough. She folded the letter and she placed it back in the toll box and she lay down in her sleeping bag and she looked up at the ceiling where the firelight flickered across the oak beams and she thought about her father and about Ezra Caldwell and about the 11 milestones somewhere out there in the forest waiting to be found. And then she closed her eyes and she slept. The first milestone Lorelei found was 200 yards south of the toll house on the east side of the old turnpike lane, tilted 45 degrees into the leaf mold, like a drunk man leaning against a wall he could no longer stand away from. It was the first week of April, and the forest floor was still wet from the spring melt. The last patches of snow were gone, but the ground was soft, and the streams were running high, and the air had that particular smell of earth waking up after a long winter. Lorelei had cleared the lane all the way to the county road, and she had started walking the turnpike route with Ezra Caldwell's survey map in one hand and a walking stick in the other, looking for the stones that marked the miles. She almost missed it. The milestone was granite about 3 feet tall, but only 8 inches of it was visible above the accumulated leaf mold and soil. The rest had settled into the ground over the course of a century, sinking slowly as the forest floor rose around it. If she had not been looking for it, if she had not known it was supposed to be there, according to the map, she would have walked right past it, thinking it was just another stone in a forest full of stones. But she was looking for it, and when she saw the top of it, the corner of dressed granite with a number carved into the weathered face, she stopped and she knelt, and she began to dig. She used her hands at first, pulling away the leaf mold and the topsoil, working carefully around the base of the stone. The granite was cold and rough under her fingers. The number carved into the road-facing side was a 7. On the backside, barely visible under a layer of lichen, were the letters GCT, Goshen Cornwall Turnpike, Milestone 7. She kept digging. She cleared the soil from around the entire base until she could see where the stone sat in the ground. It had tilted because the ground beneath it had settled unevenly, the weight of the stone pushing down on soil that had been compacted by 112 years of freeze-thaw cycles and root growth, and the slow, relentless pull of gravity. The stone had not fallen. It had simply leaned degree by degree, year by year, until it was resting at an angle that would eventually pull it all the way over, if no one intervened. Lorelei sat back on her heels, and she looked at the tilted milestone, and she thought about Ezra Caldwell walking this section of turnpike in the spring of 1912, and seeing this same stone standing upright, still true, still marking the 7th mile from Goshen. She thought about all the springs between 1912 and now, when no one had walked this route and no one had checked the milestone, and the stone had tilted a little more each year with no one to notice. She had a small fold-in shovel in her pack. She dug around the base of the milestone, going down a foot, then 2 feet, until she had exposed the full buried portion of the stone. Then she used a length of 2x4 she had brought as a lever, wedging it under the stone and prying upward, working the stone back toward vertical degree by degree. It took her an hour. The stone was heavy, easily 200 pounds, and she had to reposition the lever multiple times, packing soil beneath the stone as it rose to prevent it from settling back. But finally the milestone stood upright. She packed the earth around its base. She tamped it down with her boots. She tested the stone by pushing against it from different angles. It was solid. It would stand. She took out the small notebook she carried, and she made a sketch of the milestone, noting its position, its condition, the depth to which it had settled, the degree of tilt before correction. She measured it with a tape measure, 38 inches tall above ground after resetting, 10 inches wide, 6 inches deep. Granite. Carved number 7 on south-facing side. Letters GCT on north-facing side. Lichen coverage approximately 40%. No cracks. No spalling. Good condition overall. She photographed it from 4 angles with a disposable camera she had bought at the Litchfield drugstore. Then she stood and she put her hand on the top of the milestone, her palm flat against the cold granite, and she said aloud to the empty forest, 1 down, 10 to go. She found milestone 2 a week later. It was a mile farther south, closer to the county road, but it was not where the survey map said it should be. According to Ezra Caldwell's map, milestone 2 should have been on the west side of the turnpike lane, set back about 10 feet from the road edge. But when Lorelei walked the section, where it should have been searching the forest floor in a grid pattern, she found nothing. She expanded her search. She walked 50 yards in every direction from the marked position. She looked for any sign of worked stone, any corner of granite protruding from the leaf mold, any depression in the ground that might indicate where a stone had fallen and been buried. Nothing. She was about to give up when she remembered something her father had taught her. Stone doesn't move by itself, Silas had said. If a stone is not where it's supposed to be, someone moved it or something moved it. Look for the reason. Lorelei looked for the reason. She studied the terrain. The turnpike lane ran along a gentle slope here, and about 30 yards downhill from where the milestone should have been, there was a small seasonal creek, currently running full with snowmelt. She walked down to the creek and she followed it downstream, looking at the stones in the creek bed. She found milestone 2 in the middle of the creek, half buried in gravel water running over it. The number 2 was still visible on the upstream face. The letters GCT were worn smooth by a century of spring floods. but she could still make them out if she looked closely. The milestone had toppled probably decades ago and had rolled downhill during a particularly heavy storm coming to rest in the creek bed, where seasonal flooding had buried it in sediment. Getting it out was harder than resetting milestone 7. She had to divert the creek, first building a temporary dam of stones and logs upstream to redirect the water around the work area. Then she had to dig the milestone free from the gravel, working in the muddy creek bed, with water soaking through her boots and her pants. The stone was heavier than milestone 7, or maybe it just felt heavier because she was lifting it from an awkward angle, trying to get purchase on wet granite in a stream bed. It took her most of a day. She used a come-along winch anchored to an oak tree to drag the milestone out of the creek and up the slope to its original position. She dug a new hole where Ezra Caldwell's map indicated the stone should be set. She lowered the milestone into the hole using the winch and a jury-rigged tripod of cut saplings. She packed the earth around it. She tested it. It stood. She made her notes. She took her photographs. She put her hand on the stone. 2 down, she said. By the middle of April, she had found 4 milestones. Number 7 reset. Number 2 recovered from the creek and reset. Number 6 found intact and still standing at its original position, barely tilted, the best preserved of any she had found so far. And number 8 found fallen but intact, lying in the leaf mold about 20 feet from its original position, rolled there by a fallen tree that had since rotted away. 4 milestones in 2 weeks. 7 more to find. 45 days left before Graham Pendleton's development proposal went before the county board. The work was consuming her. She woke before dawn, and she worked until dark. She ate cold food standing up because sitting down felt like wasting time. She walked miles every day, searching the forest with the survey map in her hand, looking for the telltale shape of worked granite among the natural stones. Her boots were worn through. Her hands were blistered. She had lost weight she could not afford to lose, but she kept working. She needed help. She had known this for a week, but she had been reluctant to ask for it because asking for help meant admitting she could not do it alone. And admitting she could not do it alone felt like admitting her father had been wrong. When he said she saw structure, when he said she had the reading, when he said she understood. But her father had also taught her that pride was the enemy of good work. Check your measurements, he had always said. Ask someone with more experience. A mistake caught early is just a lesson. A mistake caught late is a failure. She needed someone with more experience. She found Callum Merrick's name in the Litchfield County Historical Society newsletter, archived at the public library. He had written an article 3 years ago about preservation techniques for 18th century fieldstone structures in northwestern Connecticut. The article had been technical, detailed, exactly the kind of writing that came from someone who knew stone, the way Lorelei was trying to know it. At the end of the article, there was a brief biography. Callum Merrick, retired preservation architect, consultant to the National Park Service, former board member of the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation. There was a phone number. Lorelei called from the payphone outside the Litchfield Library. The phone rang 4 times before a man answered. Merrick. Mr. Merrick, my name is Lorelei Thorne. I'm calling about the old Goshen Cornwall Turnpike toll house. There was a pause. Then, the toll house. I thought the Historical Society abandoned that project years ago. They did, in 2013. But I bought the property from the county last month. I'm trying to document the turnpike corridor and Locate the original milestones. Another pause, longer this time. You bought it. For $1. A sound that might have been a laugh. Smart. And you're looking for the milestones. I found 4 so far. I need to find at least 8 to prove historical continuity for a landmark designation. I have less than 6 weeks. Why the deadline? There's a developer who wants to buy the property and build a resort. His proposal goes to the county board in 6 weeks. If I can't prove the toll house and the turnpike corridor have historical significance before then, the county can revoke my deed. Callum Merrick was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you know about surveying?" "I know how to measure and document stone structures. My father taught me. But I don't know the formal techniques. I don't have professional equipment. I need help." "What did your father do?" "He was a furniture maker, but he studied stone. He taught me to read it." "Read it how?" "Mortar composition, settlement patterns, the difference between professional work and amateur work, how to tell when a wall was built and who built it, and whether it's going to stand or fall." Callum was quiet again. Then he said, "I'll meet you at the toll house tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Bring what you've documented so far." He hung up before Lorelei could thank him. Callum Merrick arrived at the toll house the next morning in a faded green pickup truck that looked like it had been old when Lorelei was born. He was a tall man, maybe 6'2", lean with gray hair and a weathered face and the kind of steady, competent hands that came from a lifetime of working with tools. He looked at the toll house for a long time before he spoke. "I came here once," he said, "back in 2012. The Historical Society was considering a restoration project. We decided it was too far gone, too isolated, no funding. I'm glad to see I was wrong." Lorelei showed him the interior. The cleared fireplace, the swept floor, the toll box on the shelf, the survey map on the wall. Callum studied everything with the attention of someone conducting an inspection, running his hand along the mortar joints, the same way Lorelei's father had taught her to do. Checking the plumb of the walls, examining the settlement at the northwest corner. "The mortar is original," he said. "Lime mortar, very high quality. Whoever built this knew what they were doing." "The turnpike company hired professional masons," Lorelei said. "According to the historical records." Callum nodded. He looked at the survey map. "This is Ezra Caldwell's map." "You know about Ezra Caldwell?" "I know he was the last toll keeper. I know he sealed the toll box and this map in the wall when the turnpike was decommissioned. I didn't know anyone had found them." He looked at Lorelei. "How did you know where to look?" "The mortar joint was softer than the others. My father taught me that soft mortar in a wall of hard mortar means someone was there after the original construction." Callum smiled slightly. "Your father taught you well." Lorelei showed him her notebooks, the sketches and measurements of the 4 milestones she had found, the photographs, the documentation of their original positions according to the survey map and their current conditions. Callum studied the notebooks with the same careful attention he had given the toll house. He did not speak for several minutes. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. There was something in his eyes that had not been there before. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "This is professional work," he said. "Self-taught but professional. You have a good eye for detail." Is it enough? Lorelei asked. For a landmark designation, it's a start. But you need more than sketches and photographs. You need formal survey data, precise GPS coordinates, photogrammetric documentation, stone condition analysis. And you need at least 8 milestones to establish continuity. Can you teach me? Callum looked at her. Why should I? The question was not hostile. It was genuine. He wanted to know. Lorelei thought about her father. She thought about Ezra Caldwell. She thought about the letter sealed in the wall and the 41 years Ezra had spent walking the turnpike and checking the milestones, and the fact that no one had checked them since. Because someone should, she said. Because these milestones have been standing for 220 years, and no one has paid attention to them for over a century. And if I don't document them now, they'll be gone in another 50 years, and no one will even know they existed. Because my father taught me to care about things that last. And because Ezra Caldwell asked someone to walk the road he walked. Callum was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I lost my wife 2 years ago. Cancer. She was a landscape architect. She worked on preservation projects, historic gardens mostly. She believed that places have memory, and that our job is to read that memory and pass it on. She would have liked you. He turned and walked back to his truck. He opened the passenger door and he pulled out a large equipment case. This is a theodolite, he said. It's a precision surveying instrument. I'm going to teach you how to use it. And then we're going to find the rest of those milestones, and we're going to document them properly, and we're going to make sure the county has no choice but to grant landmark status. He paused. I don't work for free. But I don't need money. What I need is someone to help me finish the survey work my wife and I started on the old mill sites along the Housatonic. You give me 2 weeks of your time after this project is done, and we'll call it even. Lorelei nodded. Deal. Callum spent the next 3 days teaching Lorelei how to use the theodolite, how to establish sight lines, how to measure angles and distances with precision, how to create survey maps that would hold up to professional scrutiny. He taught her photogrammetric techniques using a camera and a reference scale to create dimensionally accurate images of the milestones. He taught her stone condition analysis, how to identify and classify different types of weathering, how to assess structural integrity, how to predict failure modes. He taught her the way her father had taught her, patiently, thoroughly, with the assumption that she was capable of understanding if she paid attention. And Lorelei paid attention. They found milestone 1 together on the 4th day. It was north of the toll house, almost a Goshen, set back from the road edge at the top of a small rise. The stone was intact, but it had been struck by lightning at some point in the distant past, and there was a burn mark running down one face, a dark scar in the pale granite where the electrical discharge had altered the mineral structure of the stone. Milestone 1. The first mile from Goshen. The starting point of Ezra Caldwell's walk. Lorelei set up the theodolite while Callum photographed the stone. She took measurements. She recorded GPS coordinates. She documented the lightning scar, noting the depth of the char and the way it had caused spalling in the surrounding granite. When they were finished, Callum put his hand on the milestone and he said, 5 down, 6 to go. They worked through late April and into May. Long days in the forest searching for stones, documenting positions resetting fallen milestones. Callum brought equipment Lorelei had never seen before. A ground-penetrating radar unit for locating buried stones. A portable spectroscopy device for analyzing mortar composition. A laser scanner for creating three-dimensional models. The county will want hard data, Callum said. We give them hard data. They found milestone 11 at Cornwall Bridge, right where the survey map said it would be standing at the edge of what was now someone's backyard. The homeowner, an elderly man who introduced himself as Mr. Peterson, watched them work with interest. I always wondered what that stone was, he said. Been in my yard since I bought this place in 1987. You're saying it's 200 years old? 221, Callum said. It marked the 11th mile of the Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike, the last mile before the southern terminus. Mr. Peterson shook his head slowly. Well, I'll be damned. And you're documenting all of these? We're trying to, Lorelei said, for a historic landmark designation. You need anything from me, permission to photograph it or anything like that? A letter stating that the milestone is on your property and that you support its preservation would help, Callum said. I can do that, Mr. Peterson said. I'll write it tonight. Anything to help save a piece of history. By the end of May, they had found 7 milestones. Numbers 1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11. 4 were still missing. Numbers 3, 4, 5, and 9. 30 days left. Lorelei's savings were gone. She had spent the last of her money on food and propane 3 weeks ago, and she had been living on rice and beans and whatever she could forage from the forest. Callum had noticed. He had started bringing extra food when he came to work, always with some excuse. My daughter sent too much again. This bread is gonna go stale if someone doesn't eat it. Lorelei accepted it because she had no choice and because she understood that Callum's generosity was offered without expectation of acknowledgement. She had also started having dreams about her father. Not memories. Dreams. In the dreams, Silas was still alive and he was working in his workshop, building something she could not quite see. And he would look up when she entered and he would say, "You see structure." And she would wake up with the words echoing in her head and the smell of cherry sawdust in her nose, even though she was sleeping on the stone floor of the toll house. And there was no sawdust anywhere. She told Callum about the dreams one morning while they were walking the section of turnpike where milestone 4 should be. He's proud of you, Callum said. He's dead. Doesn't mean he's not proud. Lorelei looked at Callum. Do you dream about your wife? Every night, Callum said. She's always in her garden, always working, always telling me I'm doing something wrong. He smiled. I miss being told I'm doing something wrong. They walked in silence for a while. Then Callum stopped and he pointed at the ground. There, he said. Lorelei looked. She saw nothing at first. Then she saw what Callum was seeing. A depression in the leaf mold maybe 2 feet across, filled with dead leaves and forest debris, but shaped like a rectangle. The shape of a stone that had been there once and was gone now. Milestone 4, Callum said, or where it used to be. They cleared the depression. They found the hole where the milestone had been set. Still visible after more than a century, a rectangular excavation in the glacial till about 4 feet deep. But the stone itself was gone. Removed, Callum said. Probably in the 1960s when they built the county road. They would have taken any milestones that were in the way and either destroyed them or moved them. Can we count it? Lorelei asked. As evidence. We can document the position, Callum said, but without the stone itself, it's just a hole in the ground. The county will want to see the actual milestone. Lorelei felt something sink in her chest. 7 milestones. She needed 8. She had 30 days to find milestone 3, milestone 5, or milestone 9. 3 chances. If she failed to find any of them, she would be one short. One short of saving the toll house. One short of honoring Ezra Caldwell's letter. One short of finishing what her father had started. We need to research deeper, Callum said, studying the empty excavation. There might be records at the county courthouse. Property transfers, road construction permits. Historical Society archives. Someone documented this turnpike at some point. There might be details we're missing. Like what? Lorelei asked. Like who else walked this road? Callum said. Ezra Caldwell wasn't the only person who cared about these milestones. There were surveyors, maintenance workers, other toll keepers. Someone kept records. The next morning, they drove to the Litchfield County Courthouse. The building was federal-style brick, 3 stories with a cupola and white columns. Inside, the halls smelled of old paper and floor wax. They found the records office in the basement, a warren of file rooms with ceiling-high shelves packed with boxes and ledgers and bound documents dating back to the 1700s. The clerk, a woman in her 60s named Mrs. Patterson, listened to their request with interest. Goshen Cornwall Turnpike, she said. We have some records, not complete. A lot was lost in the 1970s when the county reorganized the filing system. But there's a collection box. Let me find it. She disappeared into the stacks and came back 10 minutes later with a cardboard archive box labeled G.C. Turnpike, 1797 to 1920. This is what we have, she said. You can use the reading room. No pens. Pencils only. Don't remove anything. Lorelei and Callum carried the box to the reading room, a small space with a table and 2 chairs and fluorescent lights. They opened the box. Inside were ledgers, correspondence survey documents, financial records, maintenance logs. Lorelei pulled out a maintenance log dated 1885 to 1890 and opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed, but the ink was still legible. Entries recorded work done on the turnpike, bridge repairs, road grading, milestone maintenance. And there, in an entry dated June 12, 1886, she found it. Milestone 9 reset with assistance of Margaret Caldwell. Stone had tilted 15 degrees. Repositioned and packed. M. Caldwell measured and documented position for survey update. Excellent work. The entry was signed by Nathaniel Pendleton. Margaret Caldwell. Lorelei looked at Callum. Who is Margaret Caldwell? I don't know, Callum said. But if Nathaniel Pendleton mentioned her by name in the maintenance log, she was important. They kept searching. In a folder of correspondence dated 1887 to 1895, they found 3 letters from Margaret Caldwell to the Turnpike Company treasurer. The letters were brief professional reporting on road conditions, milestone stability, bridge inspections. They were signed M. Caldwell, Assistant Surveyor. Assistant Surveyor. She worked for the company, Lorelei said. Or she worked with Ezra, Callum said, if her last name is Caldwell. They found the answer in a payroll ledger from 1889. Under the heading, Turnpike Personnel, were 3 names: Ezra Caldwell, tollkeeper, $18 per month; Margaret Caldwell, tollkeeper assistant, $6 per month; Nathaniel Pendleton, road maintenance, $14 per month. She was his wife, Lorelei said. Or maybe his sister. She worked at the toll house. And she was a surveyor, Callum said, looking at the letters. These reports are detailed. She knew what she was doing. They kept digging. In a folder marked Survey Updates 1885 to 1900, they found something extraordinary. Technical drawings, precise measured annotated diagrams of each milestone along the turnpike route, elevation sketches showing the stones in situ with measurements, orientation data, and condition notes. Each drawing was dated and signed. The signature read, M. Caldwell. The drawings were beautiful, professional, the work of someone who understood surveying and who had documented these milestones with the same care that Ezra Caldwell had shown in his letter. This is incredible, Callum said, studying the drawings. These are better than most professional surveys from that era. Lorelei looked at the drawing for milestone 9. It showed the stone standing upright with detailed measurements and a note in small, precise handwriting. Milestone 9 positioned 30 yards west of seasonal stream. Ground slopes 8 degrees toward water. Stone reset June 1886 after settlement. Foundation packed with crushed stone and clay. Recommend annual inspection as ground continues to settle in wet seasons. MC. 30 yards west of seasonal stream. Ground slopes toward water. Lorelei felt something click. She predicted it would settle again. And she was right, Callum said. If the ground slopes toward water and the stone is heavy, it would tilt downhill over time. Which means if it tilted and fell, Lorelei said slowly, it would roll toward the stream. They looked at each other. We've been searching in the wrong place, Lorelei said. They drove back to the turnpike corridor. Lorelei had been searching for milestone 9 in the area, marked on Ezra's 1803 survey map, which showed the approximate position. But Margaret's 1886 drawing showed the exact position relative to the stream with measurements. They found the stream. They measured 30 yards west. They marked the spot. Then they looked downhill toward the water. If it fell after 1886, Callum said, it would have rolled this way. They walked down the slope following the line of water flow. The ground was soft here, covered in moss and ferns. The stream ran through a small ravine about 50 yards from the marked position. Lorelei followed the stream, checking the banks, looking for granite. And then she saw it. Half buried in the stream bank, covered in moss and roots, was a rectangular stone about 4 feet long. She pulled away the moss. She cleared the roots. The stone had a carved number on one face. 9. Milestone 9. Exactly where Margaret Caldwell's survey notes had predicted it would end up if it tilted and fell and rolled downhill toward the water. Lorelei knelt in the stream and she put both hands on milestone 9 and she started to cry. Not from sadness, from relief, from exhaustion, from the overwhelming sense that she had just found the thing that would save everything, and from gratitude to a woman named Margaret Caldwell, who had lived and worked and surveyed this turnpike 140 years ago, and whose careful documentation had just made it possible to find this stone. 8 milestones. She had 8 milestones. She had enough. When Callum returned from the truck with the winch equipment, he found Lorelei still kneeling by the stone, her hands pressed against the carved number 9. "You found it," he said quietly. "Margaret Caldwell found it," Lorelei said. "I just followed her notes." They worked together to excavate milestone 9 and drag it back up to its original position. They reset it using the theodolite to ensure it was perfectly vertical, packing the earth around its base, the way Margaret's notes had described, with crushed stone and clay to prevent future settlement. When they were finished, Callum said, 8 milestones, GPS coordinates, photogrammetric documentation, stone condition analysis, letters from Nathaniel Pendleton, Ezra Caldwell's survey map and letter, Margaret Caldwell's technical drawings and survey notes, property owner support from Mr. Peterson. This is a solid case. "Will it be enough?" Lorelei asked. "I don't know," Callum said, "but it's the best case anyone's made for this corridor in 100 years. And we're going to make sure the county knows that Margaret Caldwell existed. She deserves to be part of this story." 7 days left. Lorelei was organizing her documentation in the toll house when she found it. A small wooden box in her father's tool chest, hidden beneath a false bottom she had never noticed before. Inside the box was a field notebook, leather-bound, filled with Silas Thorne's handwriting. She opened it and read. The notebook was dated 2010 to 2011. It was a survey log. Silas had been documenting the old Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike. He had found the toll house in 2010. He had researched Ezra Caldwell. He had located the positions of 5 milestones. He had made sketches. He had planned a restoration project. And then on the last page, dated April 2011, 1 month before he had taken Lorelei to the toll house for the first time, he had written, "Diagnosis today, pancreatic, 6 months, maybe a year. Not enough time to finish the turnpike survey. Not enough time to restore the toll house, but maybe enough time to teach Lorelei. She sees what I see. She notices the details. If I can't finish this, maybe she will. Note to self, take her to the toll house next Sunday. Show her the mortar joints. Teach her the reading. Plant the seed." Lorelei read the entry 3 times. Plant the seed. Her father had known he was dying. He had known he would not finish the project. So he had started teaching her deliberately, intentionally, planting the seed of knowledge that would grow over the next 13 years until she was ready to finish what he had started. He had prepared her for this moment. Everything he had taught her about reading stone, about patience, about attention to detail, about seeing structure had been leading to this, to the toll house, to the milestones, to the moment when she would find Ezra Caldwell's letter and understand what needed to be done. Lorelei closed the notebook and she held it against her chest, and she understood finally what her father had meant when he said, "You see structure," 2 days before he died. He had not been talking about stone. He had been talking about the pattern, the continuity, the way knowledge passed from one generation to the next, from Ezra to Margaret to Nathaniel to Silas to Lorelei, Each person walking the same road, reading the same stones, maintaining the same memory. The structure was not the toll house. The structure was the act of caring for it. 3 weeks left. Lorelei's mother visited on a Sunday in early June. Miriam Thorne drove up from Torrington in the right-hand drive Jeep she had kept after retiring from the mail route, the same Jeep she had driven for 23 years delivering mail on the Cornwall route. She parked at the county road and walked the quarter-mile to the toll house carrying a canvas bag full of groceries. Lorelei heard her coming and met her at the door. Miriam looked at her daughter and her expression did something complicated. Concern and pride and worry all mixed together. "You look thin," she said. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're living in a stone box in the woods with no electricity and no running water, and you're eating God knows what, and you look like you've lost 15 pounds. 10, Lorelei said. "And I'm eating. Callum brings food." "Who's Callum?" "A preservation architect. He's helping me document the milestones." Miriam set the grocery bag down. "Show me." Lorelei showed her mother the toll house, the toll box, the survey map, the notebooks full of documentation, the photographs of the 8 milestones they had found, Margaret Caldwell's technical drawings that they had copied at the courthouse. Miriam looked at everything the way she had looked at Lorelei's Stonewall notebooks when Lorelei was 17 with the same careful attention, the same silent assessment. When she was finished, she said, "Your father would be so angry he didn't find this first." Lorelei laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in weeks. The sound felt strange in her throat. Miriam unpacked the groceries: fresh bread, cheese, apples, canned soup, coffee. "You need to eat," she said. "You can't save this place if you starve to death first." "I'm not gonna starve." "You're trying to," Miriam said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I drove the same route for 23 years. The same 57 miles 6 days a week. Do you know what I learned?" "What?" "That repetition isn't boredom. Repetition is how you notice change. You can't see what's changed unless you've seen it unchanged 100 times at first." Your father understood that. He walked the same roads over and over because he wanted to see what changed. And he taught you to do the same thing. That's the trade, Lorelei. Not just seeing the structure. Seeing what happens to the structure over time. She put her hand on Lorelei's shoulder. "You're doing what he would have done. You're walking the road. You're checking the milestones. You're paying attention. That's all what he ever wanted." Miriam stayed for an hour. She made Lorelei eat 2 sandwiches and drink a full cup of coffee. Then she drove away in the right-hand drive Jeep, and Lorelei stood in front of the toll house and watched her go, and felt something she had not felt since her father died. She felt like someone believed in her. 2 weeks left. Callum and Lorelei were compiling the final documentation when Callum's phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, then handed it to Lorelei. "It's Graham Pendleton," he said. "He wants to talk to you." Lorelei took the phone. "This is Lorelei. Miss Thorne." Graham's voice was professional, courteous. "I wanted to give you a courtesy update. My development proposal goes before the county board in 2 weeks. I'm required to notify any affected property owners. That would be you. I know when the hearing is. Lorelei said. I also wanted to let you know that I'm not your enemy. I have some things I'd like to show you. Letters my great-grandfather wrote. Documents about the turnpike. I think they might help your case. Why would you help my case? Because Nathaniel Pendleton worked with Ezra Caldwell. They were friends. Nathaniel's letters talk about walking the turnpike together, checking the milestones, repairing the road. If I develop this land, I want to do it in a way that honors that history. But to do that, I need to know the history. And you seem to be the only person who's actually taken the time to learn it. Lorelei was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want?" "To show you the letters. Tomorrow, if you're available. My office in Litchfield, 10 o'clock. "All right," Lorelei said. She handed the phone back to Callum. "You don't have to go," Callum said. "I know, but I want to see the letters." Graham Pendleton's office was on the second floor of a restored colonial building on Litchfield's town green. The office was small but well-appointed, with wide pine floorboards and exposed beams, and large windows that looked out over the green. Graham was waiting when Lorelei arrived. He offered her coffee. She accepted. He spread the letters out on a conference table. There were 11 of them, written by Nathaniel Pendleton to his wife Martha between 1883 and 1889. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the handwriting was clear. Lorelei read them one by one. The letters talked about the work, resetting milestones that had tilted, repairing stone culverts, filling washouts on the road surface. And they talked about Ezra Caldwell and Margaret. Worked with the toll keeper and his wife today, resetting milestone 9. One letter read, "Caldwell is particular about the work. He wants every stone set true. Says a crooked milestone is an insult to the road. Mrs. Caldwell does the surveying. She has a keener eye for level than any man I've worked with." Another letter. "Caldwell walked the full 11 miles today checking the stones. Mrs. Caldwell went with him. She carries the measuring tools and makes the drawings. He says she sees things he misses. I believe it. Her survey notes are more detailed than the company's own records." Lorelei read those lines several times. Margaret Caldwell, the woman whose technical drawings had led them to milestone 9, the woman whose careful documentation had preserved the knowledge of this turnpike, the woman who had been listed in the payroll as tollkeeper assistant for $6 a month when she was doing the work of a professional surveyor. "Milestone 9, she said, looking up at Graham. "These letters mention Margaret Caldwell doing survey work. Do you know anything about her?" Graham shook his head. "I know Nathaniel worked with Ezra Caldwell. I didn't know there was a wife involved, or that she was a surveyor." "She was," Lorelei said. "We found her technical drawings at the courthouse. They're remarkable. Professional quality. She documented every milestone with precision measurements and condition notes. Those drawings led us to milestone 9. Graham looked surprised. "You found milestone 9? "We found 8 milestones total," Lorelei said. "Using Ezra Caldwell's survey map, Margaret Caldwell's technical drawings, and your great-grandfather's letters." Graham was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You've done something I didn't do. You didn't just research the history. You didn't just read about the milestones. You went out and found them. You reset them. You documented them. You walked the road the way Ezra and Margaret and Nathaniel walked it. And you did it not for money or recognition, but because you believed the work mattered. He paused. I've been thinking about what you said. About the toll house belonging at the junction, not in a museum. About how moving it would just make it a pile of rocks. You were right. What are you saying? Lorelei asked. I'm saying I'm going to withdraw my development proposal, Graham said. I'm going to speak at the county board meeting, and I'm going to support your landmark petition. Because my great-grandfather would have wanted that. And because some things matter more than profit. Lorelei stared at him. Why? Because you reminded me why I got into this business in the first place, Graham said. To preserve history, not to profit from it. And because your story about Margaret Caldwell made me realize something. History isn't just the people who got their names in the official records. It's also the people who got erased. The people who did the work, but didn't get the credit. If we're going to preserve this turnpike corridor, we need to preserve all of it, including Margaret Caldwell's story. He picked up one of Nathaniel's letters. Can I make copies of Margaret's drawings? I'd like to include them in the Historical Society archives. Of course, Lorelei said. Graham nodded. Then I'll see you at the board meeting. And Miss Thorne, thank you for not giving up on this place. The Litchfield County Planning Board met on the second Tuesday of every month in a wood-paneled room on the third floor of the courthouse, a federal-style building that had been standing on the town green since 1793. The room had tall windows that looked out over the green and the white church steeples and the sugar maples that lined the streets. It was the kind of room where decisions about land and property and the future of the county had been made for 233 years. Lorelei arrived 30 minutes early. She wore the only dress she owned. A simple navy blue cotton dress her mother had bought her for her high school graduation. She carried a leather portfolio case that Callum had lent her, filled with documentation. 8 milestone surveys, GPS coordinates, photogrammetric images, stone condition analyses, historical photographs, Ezra Caldwell's survey map and letter, Margaret Caldwell's technical drawings and survey notes, Nathaniel Pendleton's letters that Graham had copied for her, a support letter from Mr. Peterson, a letter from the Connecticut Trust for Historic Preservation that Callum had arranged, stating that the Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike corridor represented a significant example of early 19th century transportation infrastructure worthy of preservation. The portfolio felt heavy in her hands, not because of the weight of the paper, because of what it represented. 3 months of work, 60 days of searching, 8 milestones found and documented, her father's unfinished project completed, Ezra Caldwell's letter honored, Margaret Caldwell's work finally recognized. Everything depended on the next hour. The board members filed in at 7 o'clock. 7 people, 5 men, 2 women, ages ranging from maybe 40 to 70. They took their seats at a long oak table at the front of the room. The chairman, a man in his 60s named Robert Whitmore, called the meeting to order. We have 2 items on tonight's agenda, he said. First, a development proposal from Brendev Properties for a heritage tourism center on the former Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike corridor. Second, a petition for historic landmark designation for the same corridor. We'll hear the development proposal first. Graham Pendleton stood. He was wearing a suit, dark gray, professionally tailored. He walked to the front of the room and he set up a presentation on a screen. architectural renderings of the proposed Heritage Center, a cluster of small cabins designed to look like they belonged in the 19th century, a visitor center with exhibits about turnpike history, walking trails, a parking area, estimated economic impact figures, tax revenue projections, job creation numbers. The presentation was polished, professional, compelling in its way. Graham spoke clearly and confidently. He talked about honoring history while making it accessible. He talked about educational value. He talked about bringing tourism to Litchfield County, about creating jobs, about generating revenue that could fund other preservation projects. He talked for 20 minutes. When he finished, Chairman Whitmore thanked him and asked if there were any questions from the board. There were a few. Questions about environmental impact, about water and septic, about traffic. Graham answered them smoothly. He had clearly done his homework. Then Whitmore said, "We'll now hear the petition for landmark designation. Miss Lorelei Thorne." Lorelei stood. Her hands were shaking slightly. She gripped the portfolio case tighter to steady them. She walked to the front of the room. She did not have a presentation. She did not have architectural renderings or economic impact studies. She had documentation, and she had the truth, and she had to hope that would be enough. She opened the portfolio case and she spread the milestone surveys on the table in front of the board. "My name is Lorelei Thorne," she said. 3 months ago, I purchased the old Goshen Cornwall Turnpike toll house from the county for $1. When I opened the building for the first time in 80 years, I found a sealed niche in the wall containing a toll collection box, an 1803 survey map, and a letter from Ezra Caldwell, the last toll keeper. The letter asked whoever found it to walk the turnpike and locate the 11 milestones that marked the route. She laid out the survey map. The board members leaned forward to look at it. Ezra Caldwell walked the 11-mile turnpike route once every spring for 41 years. From 1871 to 1912, checking the condition of the milestones and reporting to the Turnpike Company. After the turnpike was decommissioned in 1912, no one checked the milestones again. Until now. She laid out the 8 milestone surveys one by one. I have located and documented 8 of the original 11 milestones. 3 are missing, likely removed during road construction in the mid-20th century. The 8 I found have been photographed, measured, and surveyed using professional preservation techniques. Each milestone has been reset in its original position according to the original survey maps. Each one is now standing as it stood when the turnpike was operational. She showed them the GPS coordinates, the photogrammetric images, the stone condition analyses. These milestones represent continuous physical evidence of the Goshen Cornwall Turnpike corridor, spanning 222 years. They are the only remaining markers of one of Connecticut's earliest chartered turnpikes, and they are still in their original locations, which is extremely rare for 19th century road infrastructure. She laid out Margaret Caldwell's technical drawings. These drawings were made by Margaret Caldwell between 1885 and 1900. She was the wife of Ezra Caldwell, and she worked as a surveyor for the Turnpike Company, though the official records list her only as a toll-keeper assistant. Her technical documentation is remarkably precise. These drawings led directly to the discovery of Milestone 9, which had been missing for over a century. She laid out Nathaniel Pendleton's letters. These letters were written by Nathaniel Pendleton a turnpike maintenance worker in the 1880s. They document his work with Ezra and Margaret Caldwell maintaining the road and milestones. They establish a continuous historical record of care for this corridor, extending from 1802 when the toll house was built through 1912, when the turnpike was decommissioned, and now to the present through my work documenting and preserving the milestones. She paused. The board members were listening. Some of them were examining the surveys. Some were reading the letters. Some were studying Margaret's drawings. She could not tell what they were thinking. The toll house is not just a building, she said. It's a landmark that marks the midpoint of a historical transportation route. If you separate the toll house from the turnpike corridor, you lose the context. The building only makes sense in relation to the road it served, and the road only makes sense if you can see the milestones that marked it. And this petition is not just about preserving old stones. It's about preserving the memory of the people who cared for those stones. People like Ezra Caldwell, who walked this road for 41 years. People like Margaret Caldwell, whose survey work was so good, it's still useful 140 years later. People like my father, who taught me to read stone, and who planned to restore this toll house before he died. She took out Ezra Caldwell's letter, and she read it aloud. The room was quiet when she finished. Chairman Whitmore looked at the letter for a long moment. Then he said, "Miss Thorne, can you tell us why you undertook this project? What motivated you to spend 3 months searching for old stones in the woods?" Lorelei thought about how to answer. She could tell them about her father. She could tell them about learning to read stone when she was 8 years old. She could tell them about the promise she felt she had made to Ezra Caldwell when she found his letter. Instead, she said, "Because someone should. Because these milestones have been standing for 200 years, and no one has paid attention to them. And if someone doesn't document them now, they'll be gone in another 50 years, and no one will even remember they existed. Because places have memory, and our job is to read that memory and pass it on, because the work matters." She said it simply, without elaboration, the way her father would have said it. Whitmore nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Thorne. Does anyone on the board have questions?" One of the women, a board member named Sarah Fletcher, who looked to be in her 50s, raised her hand. "How old are you, Miss Thorne?" 21. "And you did this work yourself?" "I had help. Callum Merrick, a preservation architect, taught me professional surveying techniques. But yes, I located the milestones and I reset them, and I documented them." "Where do you live?" "In the toll house." "The toll house has no utilities." "No." "How do you support yourself?" "I had savings, and Mr. Merrick has hired me to help with survey work on other preservation projects. I'll be working for the Housatonic Valley Association as a stone surveyor starting next month." Sarah Fletcher looked at the milestone survey spread on the table. "This is remarkable work for someone with no formal training." "My father trained me," Lorelei said. "He was a furniture maker, but he studied stone. He taught me to read it." Fletcher nodded. She looked at Chairman Whitmore. "I think this petition has merit. The documentation is thorough. The historical significance is clear. And the fact that someone has taken the time to actually walk the route and locate the physical evidence is more than the county has done in over a century. Plus, the discovery of Margaret Caldwell's survey work adds an important dimension. We should be preserving the memory of women who contributed to this county's infrastructure, even if they weren't properly credited at the time. Another board member, a man in his 70s named Frank Morrison, spoke up. What about the economic considerations? Mr. Pendleton's proposal would bring jobs and tax revenue. Miss Thorne's proposal preserves some old stones. I'm not sure how that serves the public interest. It serves the public interest by preserving history, Fletcher said. Not everything has to generate revenue to be worth keeping. The county has limited resources, Morrison said. We have to prioritize economic development. We also have a responsibility to preserve our heritage, Fletcher said. That's in the county charter. The debate went back and forth for several minutes. Lorelei stood at the front of the room and listened, and tried not to show how her heart was pounding. The board was split. She could see it. 3 members seemed inclined toward preservation, 2 toward development. 2 were undecided. Then Graham Pendleton stood. Mr. Chairman, may I speak? Whitmore looked surprised. Mr. Pendleton, you've already presented your proposal. I know, but I'd like to add something. Whitmore gestured. Go ahead. Graham walked to the front of the room. He stood beside Lorelei. He did not look at her. He looked at the board. I've spent the last 2 months preparing a development proposal for this site, he said. I've invested time and money. I've hired architects and environmental consultants. I've done market research. And I've convinced myself that building a heritage tourism center on the old Turnpike corridor would be good for the county and good for my company. He paused. But I was wrong. The room went very quiet. My great-grandfather, Nathaniel Pendleton, worked with Ezra Caldwell and Margaret Caldwell maintaining the Goshen Cornwall Turnpike in the 1880s. I have his letters. I've read them many times. And one thing that comes through in every letter is how much he respected them both. Not because they were educated or wealthy or important, but because they cared about the work. They cared about the road. They cared about the milestones. Ezra walked that 11-mile route every spring for 41 years. Not because anyone was making him do it after the turnpike started failing financially, but because he believed the road mattered. Margaret surveyed and documented those milestones with precision that would meet professional standards today. And she did it for $6 a month while the company called her an assistant. Graham picked up one of the milestone surveys. Miss Thorne has done something I didn't do. She didn't just research the history. She didn't just read about the milestones. She went out and found them. She reset them. She documented them. She walked the road the way Ezra and Margaret and Nathaniel walked it. And she did it not for money or recognition, but because she believed the work mattered. And in the process, she uncovered the story of Margaret Caldwell, a woman who was erased from the official history, but whose work was so good, it's still useful today. He set the survey down. Nathaniel Pendleton would have respected that. And if my great-grandfather were here today, he would tell me to withdraw my proposal and support Miss Thorne's petition. Because some things matter more than profit. Some places deserve to be preserved not because they generate revenue, but because they connect us to the people who came before us and the work they did and the care they took, including the people whose names were left out of the history books. He turned to Lorelei. I'm withdrawing my development proposal. I support the landmark designation. Then he walked back to his seat. Lorelei stared at him. She had not expected this. She had prepared to argue against him, to defend the toll house and the milestones against his economic projections and his architectural renderings. She had not prepared for him to stand beside her. Chairman Whitmore cleared his throat. Well, that's unexpected. He looked at the other board members. Given Mr. Pendleton's withdrawal, we only have one proposal before us now. The petition for landmark designation. I'll entertain a motion. Sarah Fletcher raised her hand. I move that we grant historic landmark status to the Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike Corridor, including the toll house and the 8 documented milestone locations, and that we recognize Miss Thorne as the official steward of the site. Second, said another board member. Discussion, Whitmore asked. Frank Morrison spoke. I still have concerns about the economic implications, but if Mr. Pendleton himself believes preservation is the right choice, I'm willing to defer to his judgment. He knows the development potential better than any of us. Any other discussion? Silence. All in favor. 6 hands went up, 1 abstention. The motion carries, Whitmore said. Congratulations, Miss Thorne. The Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike Corridor is now a designated historic landmark. Lorelei stood very still. She heard the words. She understood what they meant. But she could not quite process that it was over, that she had won, that the toll house was safe. Thank you, she said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. The board moved on to other business. Lorelei gathered her documentation and put it back in the portfolio case. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from relief rather than nerves. She walked toward the door. Graham caught up with her in the hallway outside the meeting room. Miss Thorne, she stopped and turned. Why did you do that? Because it was the right thing to do, Graham said, and because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten. My great-grandfather didn't work on the turnpike to make money. He worked on it because he believed in the work. I got into this business to preserve history, not to profit from it. Somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. You helped me find it again. He held out his hand. Lorelei shook it. If you ever need help with the toll house, Graham said, let me know. I mean that. Thank you, Lorelei said. She walked out of the courthouse into the warm June evening. The sun was setting over the town green. The church steeples were outlined against an orange sky. She sat on a bench and she looked at the federal-style buildings and the old trees and the brick sidewalks, and she thought about all the decisions that had been made in that courthouse over the past 233 years. Decisions about roads and property and the future of the county. Tonight they had decided to preserve the past. She took out her phone and she called Callum. He answered on the first ring. How did it go? He asked. We won, Lorelei said. Landmark status. 6-1 vote. There was a pause. Then Callum said, Your father would be proud. I know, Lorelei said. And she did know. She could feel it the same way she could feel the mortar joints in a stone wall. Her father was proud. Ezra Caldwell was proud. Margaret Caldwell was proud. The work had been done. The road had been walked. The milestones had been found. "Come by tomorrow," Callum said. "We'll celebrate." 6 months later, on a cold morning in late October, Lorelei stood in front of the toll house and watched a school bus pull up on the county road. The bus door opened and 23 high school students filed out, followed by their teacher, a woman in her 40s named Ms. Rodriguez. The students looked around with the particular mixture of curiosity and skepticism that 16-year-olds brought to any field trip that took them out of the classroom. Lorelei walked down to meet them. "Good morning," she said. "Welcome to the Goshen Cornwall Turnpike Toll House. My name is Lorelei Thorne. I'm the site steward. For the next 2 hours, I'm going to teach you how to read stone." She led them up the quarter-mile lane to the toll house. The lane was clear now. The brush cut back the stone walls on both sides visible. She had spent the summer improving the site. She had repaired the toll house roof, replacing the broken slates. She had rebuilt the top 3 courses of the chimney. She had installed a composting toilet in a small outbuilding. She had not added electricity or running water. The toll house remained what it had always been, a 12 by 12 stone room heated by a fireplace. But it was weather-tight now, stable. It would stand for another 100 years if someone kept paying attention to it. The students gathered around the toll house, and Lorelei showed them the west wall, the coursed fieldstone, the mortar joints. She taught them what her father had taught her, how to feel the difference between original construction and later repair work, how to read the settlement patterns in the foundation, how to identify the skill level of the mason by looking at how the stones were sorted and laid. One of the students, a girl about 15 with dark hair and sharp eyes, knelt down and ran her fingers along a mortar joint the way Lorelei had shown them. "This mortar is harder than the stone," the girl said. "That's right," Lorelei said. "What does that tell you? It's old. The older lime mortar gets, the harder it gets." "Exactly. This mortar is 222 years old. It's still curing. It'll be harder in another 100 years than it is today." The girl looked up at Lorelei. "How do you know all this?" "My father taught me." "What did your father do?" "He was a furniture maker, but he studied stone. He taught me to read it the way he read wood, with patience and attention." The girl nodded. She went back to examining the mortar joint. After the tour of the toll house, Lorelei led the students down the turnpike lane to milestone 7. She showed them how to document a stone structure, how to measure, how to photograph, how to assess condition. She gave each student a worksheet, and she had them practice surveying the milestone, recording its dimensions, its orientation, the depth of the carved number, the extent of lichen coverage. The students worked in pairs. Some of them were engaged. Some were bored. But the girl with dark hair, the one who had noticed the mortar hardness, worked with intense concentration. She measured the milestone 3 times to make sure her numbers were accurate. She made a detailed sketch showing the carved number and the lichen patterns in the small crack in the northwest corner. When the field trip was over and the students were loading back onto the bus, the girl approached Lorelei. "Miss Thorne?" "Yes." "Could I come back on my own time, to learn more about this?" Lorelei looked at the girl. She saw something in her face that was familiar. Curiosity. Attention to detail. the desire to understand how things were built and why they stood or fell. "What's your name?" Lorelei asked. "Anna. Anna Kowalski." "How old are you, Anna?" 15. "Do you like this kind of work, the measuring and the documenting?" "I like understanding how things are made," Anna said. "My dad builds houses. He takes me to job sites sometimes. I like watching the framing go up. I like seeing how the structure works." Lorelei smiled. "You see structure?" "What?" "Nothing." "Yes, you can come back. I run survey workshops once a month for anyone who wants to learn. The next one is 2 weeks from Saturday. Bring a notebook and dress for outdoor work." Anna's face lit up. "Thank you. I'll be here." She ran to catch the bus. Lorelei watched the bus drive away, and she thought about her father, and about the moment he had put her hand on this toll house wall and taught her to feel the mortar joint. And she understood that this was how the work continued. Not through institutions or official programs, through one person teaching another person, through patience and attention, and the slow transfer of knowledge from someone who knows to someone who wants to learn. The trade passed on. That evening, Lorelei sat alone in the toll house with a fire burning in the fireplace, and the toll box on the shelf, and the survey map on the wall. And she took out a piece of heavy paper and a pen. She wrote carefully in clear block letters, "To whoever opens this wall, my name is Lorelei Thorne. I am 21 years old. I bought this toll house from Litchfield County in March 2024 for $1. In the west wall, I found a niche sealed by Ezra Caldwell in 1912, containing a toll collection box, a survey map, and a letter asking someone to find the 11 milestones that mark the Goshen-Cornwall Turnpike. I found 8 of the 11 milestones. I documented them. I reset them in their original positions. I walked the road Ezra Caldwell walked. I honored his letter. My father, Silas Thorne, taught me to read stone when I was 8 years old. He showed me this toll house, and he put my hand on this wall and he taught me to feel the mortar joint. He died when I was 11. But the reading he taught me did not die. I have used it to preserve this place and to teach others. I also found the survey work of Margaret Caldwell, who worked alongside Ezra from 1885 to 1900. She was called a tollkeeper assistant, but she was truly a surveyor, and her technical drawings are remarkable. Her work led me to milestone 9. She deserves to be remembered. I am sealing this letter in a different wall niche from the one Ezra used. The niche is on the east wall about 4 feet above the floor. The mortar around one particular stone is softer than the mortar around the others. If you have learned to read stone, you will notice this. If you notice it, you will know what it means. Someone was here. Someone left something behind. The wall has been holding it ever since. Inside this niche, I am placing 3 things. First, a small toll collection box replica that Callum Merrick helped me forge from iron. It is not the original box. The original is in a museum now. But this replica serves the same purpose. It represents the trade, the work of keeping the toll house and walking the turnpike and checking the milestones. Second, a copy of Ezra Caldwell's 1803 survey map and copies of Margaret Caldwell's 1886 technical drawings. The originals are also in museums now, but these copies are accurate. They show all 11 milestones. 8 of them are still standing because I found them and reset them. 3 are lost. If you find this letter, perhaps you will look for them. Third, my father's field notebook from 2010 to 2011. He planned to restore this toll house, but he died before he could finish. I finished it for him. If you are reading this, it means you understand stone. It means you notice the soft mortar. It means you care about the work. Keep caring. Keep the toll house standing. Keep checking the milestones. Walk the road. The trade continues through you now. Lorelei Thorne, steward of the Goshen Cornwall Turnpike Toll House, October 2024. She folded the letter. She placed it in the small replica toll box, along with copies of the survey maps and her father's notebook. She had prepared a niche in the east wall the previous week, carefully removing a single stone and cutting a space in the wall cavity between the inner and outer courses of fieldstone. She placed the toll box in the niche. She fitted the stone back into place. She mixed a small batch of lime mortar, deliberately making it softer than the surrounding mortar, and she mortared the stone into position. When the mortar had set enough to hold, she stepped back and looked at the wall. The stone she had replaced was slightly smaller than the stones around it. The mortar was softer. If someone who understood stone examined this wall carefully, they would notice. And if they noticed, they would know what it meant. She cleaned her tools. She washed her hands in a bucket of water. She sat by the fire and looked around the toll house. The building was exactly as it had been in 1802, and exactly as it had been in 1912, and exactly as it would be in 2124, if someone kept caring for it. Stone walls, stone floor, stone fireplace, wooden shelf, wooden peg rack, one room, simple, honest, built to last. She thought about all the people who had stood in this room. The original toll keeper in 1802, Ezra Caldwell in 1912, Margaret Caldwell, whose work had been invisible for over a century, her father in 2011, herself in 2024, and whoever would find her letter in some future year. The structure was not the building. The structure was the continuity of care. 2 weeks later, Anna Kowalski showed up for the survey workshop. She was early. She was wearing work boots and carrying a notebook. Lorelei took her to the toll house, and she taught her the same lesson her father had taught her. "Put your hand on this wall," Lorelei said. Anna placed her palm against the stone. "What do you feel?" "It's cold." "What else?" Anna moved her hand along the wall. Her fingers found the joint between two stones, the line between the rocks. "It's filled with something." "Mortar," Lorelei said. "Feel it." Anna ran her finger along the mortar joint. "It's hard, smooth." "That mortar is 222 years old," Lorelei said. "It was mixed by a man who knew what he was doing, a professional mason. He sorted the stones before he laid them. He set the largest stones at the bottom and the smallest at the top. He mortared every joint with lime mortar that he mixed himself. The mortar is harder than the stone now. It's still curing. It'll be harder in another 100 years. Anna looked at the wall with new attention. "How can you tell all that just from touching it?" "Because stone tells you everything if you learn its language," Lorelei said. "This wall has been standing for 222 years. It's going to stand for another 200 years if people keep paying attention to it. The stone doesn't fail. The mortar doesn't fail. The only thing that fails is people who stop caring. She put her hand on the wall beside Anna's hand. This is what I want to teach you. The reading. Not just of stone, but of structure. The reading that tells you who built something and when and why and whether they knew what they were doing. Most people look at a stone wall and they see rocks. But if you learn to read stone, you see the person who built the wall. You see their skill, their patience, their care. The wall remembers. And if you learn to read it, the wall will tell you everything. Anna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Will you teach me?" "I'm teaching you right now," Lorelei said. They spent the morning walking the turnpike corridor. Lorelei showed Anna the milestones. She taught her how to measure, how to document, how to assess the condition of stone. She showed her milestone 7, and she told her how she had found it tilted 45 degrees and how she had spent an hour resetting it. "Why did you spend an hour resetting a stone that nobody was gonna see?" Anna asked. "Because it mattered," Lorelei said. "Because Ezra Caldwell walked this route once every spring for 41 years checking these milestones. Because my father taught me to care about things that last. Because if I didn't reset it, it would fall eventually, and in 50 years it would be gone, and no one would remember it existed. But you're the only one who knows it's here. For now," Lorelei said. "But I'm teaching you, and maybe you'll teach someone else. And that's how the memory stays alive. Not through institutions or official records, through people who care enough to walk the road and check the stones and pass the knowledge on." Anna nodded slowly. She knelt beside milestone 7, and she put her hand on it the way Lorelei had put her hand on the toll house wall. "It's cold," Anna said. "What else?" Lorelei asked. Anna moved her hand over the surface of the granite. "The number is carved deep, like whoever carved it wanted it to last." "Good," Lorelei said. "You're reading it. Keep going." They worked through the afternoon. When the sun was low and the light was turning copper through the hardwood canopy, they walked back to the toll house together. Anna filled 3 pages of her notebook with measurements and sketches and observations. At the toll house, Anna paused before getting on her bicycle to ride home. "Miss Thorne." "Yes." "Thank you for teaching me." "You're welcome. Will you keep teaching me even after today?" Lorelei looked at the girl, 15 years old, sharp eyes, attention to detail, the desire to understand. She saw herself at that age walking the abandoned roads with her notebooks, documenting the stone walls, trying to learn the reading that her father had started to teach her. "Yes," Lorelei said. "I'll keep teaching you. Come back next month and bring questions." Anna smiled and rode away down the turnpike lane. Lorelei stood in front of the toll house and watched her go. And she thought about the pattern, the structure, the way knowledge moved from one generation to the next. Ezra Caldwell had walked the turnpike and checked the milestones and sealed his letter in the wall. Margaret Caldwell had surveyed and documented with precision that lasted a century. Silas Thorne had researched the toll house and taught his daughter to read stone. Lorelei had found the letters and walked the road and reset the milestones and taught Anna. And someday, maybe Anna would teach someone else. The trade would continue. On a clear evening in late October, Lorelei sat on the fallen trunk of a white oak, 50 yards south of the toll house, and watched the last copper light fade through the hardwood canopy. The sugar maples along the lane had turned the specific burnt orange that Litchfield Hills sugar maples turn in late October. The same color they had been when her father had brought her to this toll house 13 years ago. The same color they would be 13 years from now, when someone else sat on this log and looked at this building. The toll house behind her was a dark, square shape against the trees, its slate roof catching the last light. Smoke from her fireplace rose through the canopy into the cold air. She thought about her father, Silas, who had taken her to this building when she was 8 years old and had put her hand on the wall and had said, "Feel that." She thought about Ezra Caldwell, who had walked the 11-mile turnpike once every spring for 41 years, checking the milestones and who had sealed an iron toll box and a survey map in a wall niche on the last day of the turnpike's life, because he had understood that the box and the map belonged to the building and not to any company. She thought about Margaret Caldwell, whose technical drawings had been so precise they were still useful 140 years later, and who had done the work of a professional surveyor for $6 a month while being called an assistant. She thought about Nathaniel Pendleton, who had worked with Ezra and Margaret resetting milestones and who had written to his wife about their dedication to the work. She thought about Callum Merrick, who had taught her professional surveying techniques because his wife had believed that places have memory, and our job is to read that memory and pass it on. She thought about Graham Pendleton, who had stood before the county board and withdrawn his development proposal because he remembered that some things matter more than profit. She thought about her mother Miriam, who had driven the same mail route for 23 years and who had said, standing in the doorway of the toll house, "Your father would be so angry. He didn't find this first." She thought about Anna Kowalski, 15 years old, learning to read stone, asking questions, filling her notebook with measurements and sketches, all of them connected by the toll house and the turnpike and the milestones and the work of paying attention. That was the thing about the reading our fathers teach us. We do not always know when we are 8 years old and pressing our fingertip into a mortar joint between two stones on a Sunday morning in the Connecticut woods, that the reading is itself the trade. We only know that our Father's hand is on the wall beside ours, and that the mortar is smooth and hard and the color of old bone. We do not know it then. We learn it slowly, Sunday by Sunday, wall by wall, joint by joint, across a childhood measured in miles of abandoned road and 11 hand-drawn notebooks. And then, 13 years later, we walk into a 12 by 12 stone room we have only ever seen from the outside, and we run our hands along the walls, the way our father taught us, and our fingertip catches on a single joint that is softer than the others. And we understand finally what our father had been teaching us on those Sunday walks. He had been teaching us to feel the difference between what the original builders left and what someone added afterward. He had been teaching us that in a wall full of hard mortar, one soft joint is not a flaw. One soft joint is a message, and the message is always the same. Someone was here. Someone left something behind, and the wall has been holding it ever since. Lorelei stood from the log. She walked back to the toll house. She unlocked the door with the iron key Mr. Aldrich had given her 9 months ago. She stepped inside. She lit the fire. She sat on the floor with her back against the stone wall, and she looked at the toll box on the shelf and the survey map on the wall and the niche on the east wall that held her letter. Tomorrow she would walk the turnpike route again. She would check the milestones. She would document any changes. She would do the work that Ezra Caldwell had done, and that Margaret Caldwell had done, and that her father had planned to do, and that Anna would learn to do. The work would continue. The trade would pass on. The toll house would stand. She closed her eyes and she listened to the fire crackling and the wind moving through the trees outside. And she thought about all the people who would sit in this room in the years to come. The people who would put their hands on these walls. The people who would find the soft mortar joint and chisel out the stone and discover the niche and read the letter. And she hoped they would understand what Ezra Caldwell had understood, and what Margaret Caldwell had understood, and what her father had understood and what she understood now. That the work of preservation is not about saving buildings. It is about saving the care, the attention, the willingness to walk the same road year after year and notice what has changed and what has stayed the same, and to document it and protect it and pass it on. That is the trade. That is the reading. That is what lasts. Lorelei opened her eyes. She looked around the toll house one more time. The stone walls that had been standing since 1802. The fireplace where countless fires had burned. The wooden shelf where the toll box sat. The space where people had lived and worked and cared about something larger than themselves. She had learned the language. She would keep speaking it. She would keep teaching it. The work would continue through her and through Anna and through whoever came after Anna. Generation by generation, stone by stone, joint by joint. The reading would go on. Outside, the autumn stars were beginning to appear through the trees. Inside, the fire burned steady and warm. And in the wall, hidden behind a single mortared fieldstone that was softer than the others, a letter waited for someone who understood stone. Someone who would notice. Someone who would care. Someone who would keep walking the road.